The ongoing battle over the gag order in Donald Trump's civil fraud case in New York gets even uglier. Let's discuss it. I'm Dave Aronberg, state attorney for Palm Beach County, aka the Florida lawman. Today we're discussing the gag order that Judge Engoron implemented in the case against Donald Trump in New York, the civil fraud trial where Trump has lashed out at the judge, at the attorneys, at the Attorney General, Letitia James. And in response, the judge issued a partial gag order. But the gag order doesn't apply to the judge, doesn't apply to the lawyers involved, only applies to the judge's staff. And in particular, the Judge Engoron, is trying to protect his clerk who sits next to him and occasionally will pass him notes during trial. The MAGA world has discovered that the clerk is a diehard Democrat, and so they have lashed out at her, claiming that the whole process is corrupt. And the clerk, who is not an elected official, is not a public figure, has been blasted by Donald Trump himself and has received a number of threats. And that's why the judge said, no more. No, we are not going to allow any defendant to criticize members of the court staff because they didn't sign up for it. If you're a judge, if you're the lawyers involved, you're the attorney general, you generally know how this game is played. But if you're on the staff, you, according to Judge Engoron, do not deserve any of this punishment. Now, if it's up to me, I say the gag order should be like every other gag order. It should involve comments that the defendant makes against the judge, against the lawyers, against witnesses. But Judge Engoron only limited it to court staff. And then he extended the gag order to include not just Trump, but Trump's lawyers, after Trump's lawyers also made some snide comments about the clerk. So when Trump supporters say that there is a two-tiered justice system, maybe they're right, but not for the reasons that they maintain. Perhaps they're right in that if any other criminal defendant said the things that Donald Trump said about the judge and lawyers and clerk, that they would have been sanctioned a long time ago. They may even end up in an orange jumpsuit. But for the former president, he gets a lot more deference because he's running for president. He's the leading candidate on the Republican side. He used to be the president, and so he gets a lot more deference. And you can see it also in the sanctions. Twice, Judge Engoron has sanctioned Donald Trump for blasting the clerk in violation of the gag order. Once it was for $5,000. The second time the sanction was $10,000. It's not a huge amount for a self-professed billionaire. So you can see why a lot of us are thinking, if this were anyone else, that person would be treated far differently. But it is what it is, and that gag order is still in place. Well, it used to be in place because what happened is that Donald Trump's lawyers appealed the gag order, and the appellate court has temporarily put a hold on the gag order until they can have a full review of it to make sure it doesn't violate the First Amendment. So in the meantime, it's game on again for Donald Trump and his supporters to keep attacking the clerk. And unfortunately, the language that has been used has been really disturbing. In a legal brief just filed by Judge Engoron in support of the gag order, the judge attached an affidavit from Captain Charles Holland of Court Security, where he wrote that when Mr. Trump violated the gag orders, the number of threatening, harassing, and disparaging messages increased. The captain also said that these threats are serious, not hypothetical or speculative, and that many of the threats against the judge and the clerk were anti-Semitic and came by phone, text, email, and social media. Transcriptions of the voicemails that were sent to the judge, calls from Trump supporters, came to 275 single-space pages. In the affidavit, they actually quote some of the calls and messages that the court staff has received, and it's pretty awful stuff. I'm only going to read you two of them, and not the ones with the vile anti-Semitic language. But here's just a small sampling. One caller said, trust me when I say this. I will come for you. I don't care. Ain't nobody gonna stop me either. Another person left a voicemail that said, resign now, you dirty, treasonous piece of trash snake. Another one said, we are going to get you and any one of you dirty, backstabbing, lying, cheating American. You are nothing but a bunch of communists. We are going to remove you permanently. And yeah, I left the grammatical errors in the original. One thing that trolls and anti-Semites don't quite understand is the difference between your and your. I don't understand why that's so hard, but so you can often tell when people are trolling you if they can't get the your versus your right, but I digress. So as far as these messages, I think what's going to happen is that the appellate court is going to reinstate the gag order because a criminal defendant doesn't have the same kind of First Amendment rights you and I have. Once you are charged with a crime, you give up some rights because you're now potentially going to lose your freedom. Because when you're a criminal defendant, you don't get the same First Amendment rights as everyone else. Criminal defendants have rights taken away because, after all, they're in jeopardy of having their freedom taken away permanently. And at least in the short term, some of them do go into pretrial detention. And if you're not in pretrial detention, you get what's called a bond or you get out on bail, and you have a set of pretrial release conditions. And those conditions will often include a ban on communicating with co-defendants, a ban on communicating with victims, a ban on the use of alcohol. So you have a number of rights that we all enjoy that are curtailed once you're a criminal defendant. So the fact that Donald Trump is running for president doesn't give him any special permissions under the law. It just makes him like everyone else, except with a bigger megaphone. And that bigger megaphone can lead to some really terrible results. I mean, remember the case of Cesar Sayak? He was that bodybuilder who lived in his van in South Florida, and he was so enraged by what Trump was putting out there in a previous election that he sent bombs through the mail right before the election to various members of the media and Democratic elected officials. How about the guy who was a big Trump supporter who went to the FBI headquarters in Cincinnati and shot it up? Or the guy who went to former President Obama's house in Washington, D.C. after former President Trump doxed Obama. And the guy ends up a block from Obama's house and he has guns in his van. And then, of course, there's January 6th. So, words matter. Words have consequences. And so that's why it's important for judges to treat the former president just like everyone else. I mean, the fact that they keep treating him with kid gloves is perhaps only going to get someone hurt. And it is a distressful sign of a march towards fascism when you have political leaders who are encouraging violence of their political opponents. So it's important, for the sake of our democracy, for the sake of our criminal justice system, for the sake of safety, for criminal defendants, whether they're Trump or anyone else, to be held to the same standard that if you threaten witnesses or judges or prosecutors, you should be sanctioned for it. You should perhaps lose your pretrial freedom. But for Donald Trump, he does get more deference than anyone else. And look, even with Judge Chutkan, who is known as a no-nonsense judge, she implemented a partial gag order on him in the Washington, D.C. case, the election interference case. And then it was appealed by Donald Trump, and Judge Chutkan put a hold on it on appeal. And he continued to go after people like Mark Meadows. And when that happened, the judge said, okay, we're going to reinstate the gag order. But, you know, when you pause it, when you appease these individuals, what do you think is going to happen? And that's what happened. He went after the key witness in the case, Mark Meadows. And so that gag order is also on appeal now. So here we are with 4 criminal trials hovering over Donald Trump, where you have multiple civil trials. And so far, there have been only 2 gag orders implemented. They've both been pretty limited, and there's only been 2 sanctions so far against Trump for a total of $15,000. Now, keep in mind, the next civil trial against Trump will be a real important one, because that's the E. Jean Carroll retrial, and that really gets under Trump's skin. You know he's going to be lashing out there. So if there's no gag order there, you can see his minions being all riled up, because that's the sexual assault trial where he's already been found liable for sexual assault. But because he made those same defamatory statements again, he's going back into the courtroom. So that's coming in January. So stay tuned. That's this episode of Florida Lawman. I'm Dave Aronberg, state attorney. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking. And I'll see you next time.
Hey, Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.